on how to help them make better decisions and how to avoid disasters. Because unfortunately, businesses often don't really invest into decision-making skills. It seems silly. Decision-making is so foundational to everything that we do. And there are so many businesses that went bankrupt because their leadership made bad decisions.
Welcome to the Laws of Business podcast. Here, we will share the skills you need to make your business a success. Learn about goal setting, productivity, time management, marketing, and much more. Hear inspiring stories with today's best business leaders and join a hub of thousands of passionate entrepreneurs across the world. And now, here's your host, Jamil Jama.
Have you ever heard of the saying, just go with your gut, just trust your gut feeling? Well, our guest today, Gleb, doesn't seem to think that that is the right thing to do. This is one of the things we'll be chatting about in this interview with Gleb. Gleb will be telling us what we should be going with, instead of just going with our gut feeling. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Law of Business podcast. I'm your host, Jamil Jama, and today we're going to be talking about a really important topic. Today we're going to be interviewing Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, about decision making, how to avoid making the wrong decisions. I'll just let everybody know who Gleb is. Dr. Gleb is passionate about two things: helping people think more clearly and advancing global flourishing. These passions combined into one when he and his wife Agnes co-founded Intentional Insights in the winter of 2014. Since that time, Gleb has collaborated with a group of like-minded enthusiasts to translate research on rational thinking, emotional intelligence, and effective giving into daily life strategies that advance global flourishing. He was always excited about such ideas, leading him to get a PhD in the history of science, researching the intersection of psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and behavioral economics. Gleb currently holds a tenure-track professorship at the Ohio State University and is a member of the Decision Sciences Collaborative there. He published dozens of peer-reviewed essays in academic venues in the US, UK, France, Germany, and Russia, and elsewhere, as well as numerous popular articles, and serves on a number of boards, for instance, as the science advisor on the Planet Purpose Advisory Board. So, Dr. Gleb, that was just an overview of what you do, wasn't it? Because you do a lot more than that.
Sure. Yes, it's just a brief overview. And what we're going to be focusing on today is just a narrow area of what I do, which is decision making. And I do a lot of consulting for organizations and do speaking in the US, UK, a lot of other countries on how to help them make better decisions and how to avoid disasters. Because unfortunately, businesses often don't really invest into decision-making skills. It seems silly. Decision-making is so foundational to everything that we do. And there are so many businesses that went bankrupt because their leadership made bad decisions. But for some reason, they don't invest into decision-making skills. They don't train their leaders on decision-making. And it's really sad to me when I see that a good business go under simply because of bad decisions. It's a real tragedy. So this is something I consult with for many organizations, and I can talk about that, but that's the essence of what I want to focus on.
Awesome, Gleb. And Gleb, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out, your precious time out to do this interview. I appreciate it so much.
Sure, happy to do so.
Awesome. I'm going to start with a quote. People do not realize how important decisions are until they make the wrong ones.
Yes.
So, Gleb, how can in this interview we're going to be talking about business. Mm-hmm. How can businesses avoid making the wrong decisions?
So they need to realize that there are a number of human biases, problematic thinking patterns, and this is cognitive biases. And these are what scholars call problematic thinking patterns that lead us to make bad decisions. Our brains have evolved to be adapted to the savanna environment, to the fight or flight response, whereas we don't live in the savanna environment right now. It's not the same thing. But unfortunately, we still make decisions based on our gut reactions, based on our intuitions. Strong leaders are perceived as those who make their gut reactions quickly and confidently. In reality, it's going to end up often poorly if you make a decision that goes with your gut instead of having a deliberative, thoughtful process of making a decision. So the first thing to do is to slow down. The vast majority of time, when we think we need to make a split-second decision, we shouldn't. We should take the time to slow down. If we, for example, are deciding which supplier to work with for a business, then you have 3 suppliers and your gut tells you to work with one. That doesn't mean that that's the right person to work with. You might not be considering a whole lot of factors that would cause that supplier to be a bad one for you in the long term. So our gut, research shows that our gut is very short-term oriented. It doesn't orient nearly enough to the long term. So even though you may feel in your gut this is a good person to work with, that may be a very short-term decision that will be really costly to you in the long term if you'll be not working with this supplier. So what's very helpful for this process when you're choosing among several options, and if anyone wants a thorough description of this, a thorough tip sheet, I can send you the tip sheet if you email me at gleb@intentionalinsights.org and you tell me you heard me on this podcast. So at gleb@intentionalinsights.org and tell me that you heard me on this podcast.
I'll leave that in the show notes anyway.
Excellent. But here's the brief version of what you do. You list out the attributes of each of the decision that you want to make. So, for example, if you're deciding which supplier to work with, then you list things like cost of doing business with this supplier, experience of this supplier, reputation of the supplier, and let's say your warmth, the quality of your relationship with the point person. So someone can make better decisions through understanding that our brains are not adapted for survival and thriving in the current environment. They grow up in the savanna environment, so the fight or flight response. So making intuitive, quick decisions with our guts, that's what was important back then. That's not what's important right now. It's very harmful, research shows, to make intuitive decisions with our guts. We often make really bad decisions, even if they're comfortable, even if they feel like they are good decisions. They're often actually quite bad decisions that lead us to disaster. And so what we need to do when we are facing any sort of decision is to slow down, take our time, and relax and go through a thorough, deliberative decision-making process. So, for example, if we're deciding which supplier to work with, what we want to do is to list out all the steps, all the attributes of each supplier. And I have a tip sheet that I'll be happy to send to people who email me and tell me that they heard me on this podcast that goes through this process in detail with guidelines, but I'll just go through it very briefly here on the podcast. So what you do is you list out the attributes of each supplier. For example, cost.
So Gleb, before you start, where can people? What's your email address so people can contact you to get the?
So my email address is gleb, Gleb, at intentionalinsights.org. That's again Gleb at intentionalinsights.org. And much more about this is on my website, glebtsipursky.com. That's GLEBTSIPURSKY.com. So let's go back to the decision-making process. You think of a supplier. You have 3 suppliers who you are considering working with, and you evaluate what are the important factors to you. For example, how much each supplier's costs are. So how much it costs, the reputation of each supplier, and then the quality of your relationship with the point person for the supplier. So each of these would be, important factors, or whatever might be important factors to you. Then you rate all of them on a scale of 1 to 10. How much is important is cost to you, and all reputation and relationship. And so 1 is lowest of importance, 10 is highest importance. Then you rate each supplier on each of these things. So you have, Jim, Mary, and Susan, let's say, are your suppliers, potential suppliers. And you rate Jim on cost, you rate Jim on reputation, you rate Jim on relationship, and each of them in turn. So now you have, for each supplier, you have a rating for their reputation, and you have a value for how important reputation is, and so on. So now you just multiply these out, and you have a very clear mathematical evaluation of how good each supplier is. You have a clear point system. This is good if it's very good if you're a sole entrepreneur and you're making a decision, but it's especially good if you're part of a team, because then you have a clear, transparent decision-making process, which you can all discuss and decide on together as part of the team. And this can be applied to any sort of decision where you're facing multiple options, which is the point of a decision, right? So you can have two options, you can have more than two options, but in any case, let's say you're buying a car for your business, or you're deciding where to move your office, or you're deciding which employee to hire. All of these things can be approached through this mathematical decision-making model that is much better for making actually big, significant decisions.
That's interesting, because I was always told that you should go by your gut feelings. So that's not the case, is it? Is there research that proves this?
Yes. So there's research that I described in a tip and guidelines sheet that people can email me and get. But yes, it's very much so that your intuitions, your gut is actually a quite bad way to make decisions. And it's not something to be trusted. Now, why people say go with your gut is simply because it feels comfortable, and that's easy. When you feel, something with your gut, it feels comfortable, it feels right. That's what our gut system is. That's what our gut is. It feels intuitive. It's comfortable. Just like taking a second piece of chocolate cake may feel comfortable and intuitive, but it may not be the right decision for your goal, right? Yeah. Or if your boss is giving you some constructive criticism, you may want to shout back at your boss and say, no, that's not right. But that's not the right decision in that moment, unless you want to get fired. So in the same way, we shouldn't trust our intuition in making big, significant decisions for our business. Trusting your intuition costs you a lot of money.
Decisions determine destiny as well. So
yes, absolutely.
So my next question for you, Gleb, is decisions determine destiny. So do you have any stories of like a successful client that you helped to make a right decision, or that you stopped them from making the wrong decision?
Sure. So I'll give an example of a client who I'm doing consulting with right now. So I'm working in Columbus with an engineering consulting firm called Edison Welding Consulting and EWI. It's a firm of hard engineers. So they have 150 welding-oriented engineers, hard science engineers. And they are trying to get them to motivate them to do more sales for the firm, for doing conference presentations and writing white papers. Well, they provided them with training on doing sales and on how to do this sort of presentations, but they found that the engineers aren't really doing it. So they were very confused. And they're like, well, how do we motivate these engineers to do stuff? Are they lazy? Are they incompetent? And they brought me in. And I talked to them, and I found out that the engineers just weren't emotionally engaged with doing this stuff. It didn't feel comfortable to their gut to do such selling. And I talked to their bosses, to the HR manager, and I said, hey, so, you realize that your engineers, despite you giving them tools for presentations and how to do marketing, they're just not emotionally motivated to do it. And they were like, what? Our engineers have emotions? And this was a basic, so I talked about the cognitive biases earlier, which are problematic thinking errors that cause us to make bad decisions. And this is one of these cognitive biases called empathy gap. So empathy gap is where we underestimate the intensity of feelings in other people. This is something that so many of my clients and just companies in general experience. They treat their employees as if their employees are essentially robots and motivated only by money and will do whatever the company tells them to do. They don't think about the emotions of these people. They don't think about how these people feel. Whereas what research shows is that emotions are fundamentally important for motivating people and getting them engaged. So I had them change the way that they were speaking to their engineers and had them phrase things in terms of being thought leaders and getting a reputation among their peers, because engineers are emotionally motivated by what other engineers think about them and by having a high reputation. And after that, the engineers were much more willing to do white papers and conference presentations. In fact, they did 40% more of them the year after I did the intervention. And they had 25% more client contacts as a result, which is the point that they were going for. So that's an example of how these sort of cognitive biases, the empathy gap, causes us to make bad decisions, and how we need to address our emotions and our gut reactions, not go with our gut, in order to get the right decisions.
Awesome, Gleb. And Gleb, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky is a qualified doctor. You're a qualified doctor as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, I can't pronounce your surname. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm sorry. It's a Russian surname, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah. Dr. Gleb is fine. Okay,
Dr. Gleb is a qualified doctor, so he knows what he's talking about. He's qualified for this. Success is a decision away. If anybody wanted to contact you, how can they contact you?
They can contact me at Gleb, G-L-E-B, at intentionalinsights.org to talk about speaking, consulting, or anything else that they would be interested in. And I have done speaking and consulting in the UK as well as the US, so both by video conference and in presence. So that's possible. And they can go and visit my website at glebtsipursky.com to see some examples of my talks, videos, and consulting engagements.
Yeah, and you've got a free giveaway that.
That's right. They can email me.
Is it a guideline? Is it a guidelines? Tip sheet?
Yes.
Guidelines.
That's right.
Avoiding disastrous decisions guideline, right?
That's right. They can email me at Gleb, G-L-E-B, at intentionalinsights.org to get a copy of that.
And that covers the tip sheet, 7 steps for avoiding disastrous decisions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Gleb. Gleb, sorry for not being able to pronounce your surname. I'm sorry for that.
No worries. Not a big deal.
I want to thank you so much for coming on the show to tell us how to avoid disastrous decisions.
You're welcome. I'm glad I was able to help.
That's awesome. And I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in. And I'm Jamil Jama. This is The Law of Business. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Laws of Business podcast. Find out more about us on thelawsofbusiness.com. Thank you for being a part of our journey.